Welcome to 10 for 10, the podcast that delves into 10 modern Israel concepts, each for about 10 minutes. We are Dr. Tal Grinfas David and Dr. Jonathan Golden, and today's episode will ask whether Jewish immigration before and after statehood helped strengthen the state, and whether immigrants were able to become part of the fabric of society. Is Israel a harmonious melting pot or multicultural strife? In the last episode, we examined immigration through the lens of individual stories and choices. But in this episode, we will examine immigration to Israel as strategically essential for the future of the state. If one believes that Israel should continue to be a Jewish and democratic state, then it follows that maintaining a Jewish majority is a core national interest, and should the demographics change, it would become an existential threat to the state of Israel. Meaning, if Jews were no longer the majority, it would either be a non-Jewish democracy or it would be a theocracy where the religious minority would rule over its citizens. However, it is not just a numbers game. As Jews over the last century and a half have immigrated to Israel from all corners of the world, they bring with them a political, economic, religious, and cultural diversity that also challenges the state's unity and the government's ability to create a coalition whose policies actually represent the majority of Israeli views. We will explore how waves of immigration have influenced and continue to shape Israeli life. Jonathan, how did early Zionist leaders think about questions of mass Jewish immigration?
At the outset, Zionist leaders understood that in order to declare statehood, they would need a critical mass of Jewish citizens who could both defend and grow the country. In the major immigration waves of 1880 to 1924, most Eastern European Jews chose to immigrate to America rather than to the land of Israel. In that time period, well over 2 million chose the United States, while about 200,000 or so chose the land of Israel. Thus, the Sochnut, or Jewish Agency, had concentrated efforts to encourage Jewish immigration to the land of Israel from Europe. By the end of World War II, though, the locus of Jewish immigration shifted from European to North African and Muslim lands. Take, for example, David Ben-Gurion's 1 million plan, which was articulated towards the end of World War II, but was fully implemented with the establishment of the states in 1948. The plan did achieve its goal to more than double the Jewish population of Israel as of the early 1950s. The plan focused on the absorptive capacity of the states to take in immigrants in terms of the natural and national resources available: water, land, transportation, work opportunities, etc. During and after World War II, it became apparent that Jews from Arab and Muslim lands would constitute a higher percentage of the immigration than originally anticipated. While Zionist leaders encouraged these immigrants to learn Hebrew, integrate into the economy, and take on the identity of the new Jew as state builders, they did not consider policies that preserve the languages and cultures of their countries of origin. Tal, how did the state handle the mass waves of Jewish immigrants from Arab and Muslim lands?
Well, at first, not well. In the 1950s, the nascent state could not match the pace of immigration, which included some 850,000 immigrants displaced from the Holocaust and from Muslim countries. Large-scale movements such as Operation Magic Carpet, rescuing Jews from Yemen, and Operation Ezra Nehemiah, which brought Jews from Yemen, Aden, and Iraq, challenged the founders, who were largely Europeans, to view Jews from these Muslim countries as equally ready to be absorbed into the culture, economy, and political frameworks that they had established. Many parodies of the clash of cultures were produced, such as the movie Salach Shabati, a Romeo and Juliet satire showcasing the stark differences in the stereotypes immigrants held of one another that created glass ceilings and unequal treatment, covering things such as the role of women in society, equal rights, housing, and the lack of shared values and priorities. Within this wave, Jews experienced profound differences, as seen in the poetry writings of Lydia Bar-Av, Roni Somek, Yossi Alfi, Erez Biton, and so many other Jewish artists from Muslim countries, whose families fled persecution after the founding of Israel. While Bar-Av writes about her mother singing in the kitchen of the Ma'abara, the tent cities that Jews were settled in until government housing could be built, she recalls the laughter and smells and tastes of her culture and the messianic joy Her large family of 8 brothers and sisters felt fulfilling a dream, even while sitting on boxes because chairs were not available. Roni Somik writes about the poverty line and describes his childhood recollections as abysmal in the transit camp, writing, "The only line I saw was the horizon, and under it, everything looked poor." Alfie wrote a poem of a recipe titled How to Make an Iraqi, in which he describes the harsh stereotypes about their clothing and culture, as well as the treatment upon arrival to Israel when immigrants were disinfected with DDT sprays and their language and culture was not valued when trying to create the image of the tough new Jew. Erez Biton wrote a shopping song on Dizengoff Street, in which he talks about the role of language in preventing Mizrahi Jews from penetrating the economic glass ceilings, stating that when working, he has to unsheathe his up-to-date Hebrew. But in the evening, he heads back to the outskirts and to another Hebrew. We learn that in its fervor to create policies that would quickly integrate so many Jews from all corners of the world, the state did not account for the differences between the founding waves and the new incoming waves, and the hurt and disenfranchised feelings of those who experienced these policies. The immigrants felt left out of positions of power and economic opportunity, with lingering resentment for the largely Ashkenazi founders of the state. Compounding these sentiments, a scandal was exposed in which children of Yemenite women were separated from their families and given up for adoption to Ashkenazi families, the goals of which were to offer these children better lives. A government commission was convened to study the scandal, hold people to account, and reunify families. But not all records of those adoptions were preserved, and so to this day, not all of those children have found their biological parents. By the end of the decade, most immigrants were placed in government housing, and the tenement cities, and decades later, the separations of families, has become a shameful stain of the past, never again to be repeated. Learning from the failures and the generational trauma imposed upon some of the immigrants, the State of Israel was able to course correct in later policies and budgets to account for better experiences and absorption of immigrants from a wide variety of countries. Jonathan, how did the State of Israel's legislation ensure that future Jewish immigration to Israel would foster a more unified and Jewish society?
The Law of Return of 1950 is a bedrock piece of legislation that ensured a steady stream of Jewish immigrants for decades to come. It reinforced the idea of Israel as a safe haven for Jews around the world. At the same time, it raised questions about who is a Jew and what it meant to be tied to the destiny of the Jewish people. Take, for example, the famous Brother Daniel case, which was argued in Israel's Supreme Court. A Catholic monk who became Christian to save himself during World War II and chose to keep his Christian identity after the war. Brother Daniel argued from a halakhic perspective the notion of once a Jew, always a Jew, and having Jewish parents to make the case to come to Israel under the Law of Return. However, the Israeli courts did not agree and denied his ability to come to Israel under the Law of Return because after the threat to his life had passed, he continued to live as a Christian monk. This was the beginning of decades of debates to this very day about who qualifies to come to Israel under the Law of Return. The law was modified in the 1970s for a broader definition of who is a Jew, but the debates did not end, including about people who had one Jewish grandparent. The chief rabbinate took charge of the Interior Ministry and as a result limited who would qualify under the Law of Return. Their policy choices impeded future immigrants from Ethiopia or the former Soviet Union who did not fit the halakhic definition of the rabbinate. With the mass waves of Jews of the former Soviet Union and their families who started to come in large numbers in the early 1990s, the issue of who is a Jew became a contentious national debate, impacting Jews in Israel and throughout the diaspora. Tal, what does the case of Yisrael Beiteinu tell us about how immigrants navigate holding on to their culture versus integrating fully into Israeli society?
The waves of immigration and their absorption experiences not only challenged Israeli society and its cohesion, but also had a major implication for its policies. For example, those Mizrahi Jews who felt excluded or disrespected in the 1950s They later voted for Menachem Begin's right-wing party in the 1977 elections, better known as the Mahapach, or the Revolution, in which the founders' parties were unseated. Israel Beitenu, the political party, is another example of the impact of nearly 1 million former Soviet Jews who were not religious or knowledgeable of Judaism because in their countries of origin they were not allowed to practice. They viewed Haredi policy as an infringement on their rights to live as secular Jews, and often bucked the religious policies, threatening to withdraw from the governing coalition. Though Israel Beitenu under Lieberman made no gains with respect to commerce and transportation on Shabbat, or other religious overreach as they would define it, they did ultimately withdraw from the government over exemptions from the IDF draft. And this caused the cycle of 5 elections in 2 years. It should be noted that in a study in 2018, it was found that 2 generations after immigration, those grandchildren no longer identify as immigrants from the country of origin of their grandparents, who used to say, I am a Ukrainian Jew or I am a Moroccan Jew, and they largely define themselves as Israelis. This is even more pronounced as 2 and 3 generations after that initial wave of immigration, Israelis marry other Israelis from different ethnicities and cultures. So the extent to which past immigration waves will influence Israeli politics is diminishing, and future immigration waves, together with current Israeli citizens, will determine the policies of the state going forward. In our next episode, as we explore Mamlachtiyut, statism 2.0, we will talk about the growing trends in immigration and emigration as they pertain to the existential need to maintain a critical mass of Jews and a nation that can coalesce around a common vision for the future. When we look at artifacts like the cartoon of Kariel Kardosh, who depicted Israeli immigration as Jews from different countries jumping into a meat grinder and emerging as Srulik, the new Jew with his biblical leather sandals, his khaki shorts, and his pointy bucket hat, we understand that there has been a chasm between the state's need to create a unified nation of new citizens and the diversity on the ground experienced by immigrants, which was at times jarring. Over the decades, Israel has continued to serve as a safe haven for Jews and has learned from the past the need to preserve languages and cultures of immigrants, not only for intelligence gathering in foreign countries, but also to offer an experience that signals recognition, appreciation, equality, and support in a new country. Thank you for listening to Israel's Ingathering of the Exiles, Harmonious Melting Pot, or Multicultural Strife. Please visit our websites, heartstance.org and tgdconsulting.org, to download our Family and Educator Guide with links to examples of additional stories of immigration, resources, and discussion prompts. Thank you for listening.